I want to say thank you to Darcella, the VBRC board and staff, and especially the 5,480 plus veteran entrepreneurs that the VBRC has worked with in a 5-state area. So thank you to everyone who has been part of this. Congratulations to the new St. Louis Mayor Jones, and a special thank you to your father for his service during the Vietnam War. Not a popular thing to have done, so thank you. I want to say hello to Maureen Brinkley, fellow former co-worker, stalwart in SBA St. Louis District Office and District Director. Good morning, Maureen. It's good to see you continue on with your good work. And I want to say thank you to her staff as well, because I know, this is my editorial, SBA is under-resourced, understaffed, and tasked with an enormous mission of engaging half of America's economy. So thank you, Maureen. In 1969, I was just a kid from Overland who joined the US Air Force. In 1972, I got an unexpectedly early discharge, came back to St. Louis, didn't know what to do. My first job was a GS1 job as a janitor at the Military Records Center on Page Boulevard, out very near where I grew up. By early 1974, again, almost as an accident, I started as a volunteer at a startup veteran service center here in St. Louis. Our first location was in an old American Legion post in Veneta Park, Missouri. 20 years later, I totaled it all up, and we had assisted more than 15,000 veterans and family members. We had raised more than $5 million, primarily through grant writing, and provided assistance to those veterans and their families. And through that, that also included approximately 700 plus Missouri, primarily veteran entrepreneurs that we tried to assist through a series of program activities, first with our Veteran Service Center, second with a Veterans Business Resource Council made up of volunteers and supported by SBA. Third, we created what was called the Veteran Entrepreneur Training Program, and with a follow-up that provided training and assistance to almost 200 veterans and family members from the metro area, with an enormous amount of support and resources coming from a lot of private sector veterans. And then fourth, basically, in 1995, I had pretty much run my gamut as the director of the Veteran Service Center. So I decided it was time to move full-time to my own small business that I had run as a sidelight for 12 years at that point. I decided at the same time that I was going to continue to advocate and push for policy and program remedy for the exclusion of veterans that was going on not only at SBA, but more broadly across the entire economic development support ecosystem in America. Veterans were left out. And we picked that mantle up, myself and a small circle of people, and we pushed to change that. So in 1997, in a meeting with a member of Congressman Jim Talon, who was chair of the House Small Business Committee, he asked me a question and I responded that I'd like to talk to you, sir, about how veterans are left out at SBA. And he said, let's talk. By 1999, we had introduced, passed, and drafted legislation that created what became the Veterans Entrepreneurship and Small Business Development Act of 1999 that passed Congress unanimously, but that was not an easy thing to do. We had worked on that since the 1970s. Now, Because of that, I was urged by the community to go to DC and go after the job. Well, I went after the job, and that was before I went to DC. And in actually early in 2000, I was offered the position of associate administrator for veterans business development at SBA. And I would have been the first into that job. So I accepted it, and I had competed against 71 other candidates for that job. So I left St. Louis, moved to DC, and became a bureaucrat. Having never been one before that, my last job as a GS1 janitor helped prepare me for that. So I moved to DC and took it on. And the Veteran Business Resource Centers, Veterans Business Outreach Centers, there's a reason that name was there, were one of my programs. And one of the things I had to do when I got there was redesign the program because it was really ill-designed by some previous bureaucrats in SBA. One of the lessons I had learned before I went to DC, which really led to the advocacy, was that I understood, especially in St. Louis, that if veterans are not specifically included, veterans become tacitly excluded. And that's a lesson that I don't expect anyone at this event this morning. I expect everyone understands that to a degree. St. Louis is a wonderful place to grow up and live if you're from the right neighborhood, if you're from the right category, if you're from the right background, if you went to the right schools, it's a great place. If you didn't, it can be a bigger challenge. And that was a challenge that I faced in many of the veterans that we worked with through our not-for-profit base. So anyway, today, there are some 3 million plus American veteran entrepreneurs. They generate about $1.5 trillion a year in economic activity in the American economy. In Missouri, there's almost 50,000 self-employed small business owners who are veterans. In the St. Louis metropolitan area, based on big numbers, there's 25,000 plus self-employed small business owners who are veterans, service members, family members. I want to touch on diversity because there's been a discussion in the veterans community for decades about, are we a diversity community or not? And I think we are. And my point is that there is no more diverse or inclusive community of Americans, and for that matter, American entrepreneurs, than our veterans, the men and women who have stepped up and served, and this includes their spouses and their family members, because they serve as well, just in a different kind of a way. So I wanted to make that point because, again, going back to advocacy and program and policy development, which was my responsibility when I went to DC across the entire federal sector, what I've learned is that if veterans are not specifically included, we are tacitly excluded. So I wanted to close today with a couple of comments, because that continues to this day. If we don't push for, request, require the inclusion of veterans in efforts, we're tacitly excluded. And we're essentially ignored. People don't understand the challenges that veterans face when they serve and the challenges they face when they come home and they want to be an entrepreneur. Access to resources is a big challenge for every American, and that includes veterans specifically. So there are two timely examples today that require your attention, because I'm mostly retired. And while I'll be involved in this, there are two things happening that have just started in the last couple of 3 weeks that veterans are again being tacitly excluded from. The first is the new St. Louis 2030 jobs plan. It has created a pretty good buzz and talks a whole lot about diversity and inclusion. But the only place that the V word, veteran, is even mentioned is in their foreword. and they mention veteran once. But if you read the plan itself, which I did pretty quickly, I admit, and it's over 100 pages long, the plan itself never mentions veterans once, never once. And this is designed to be a plan to guide a whole range of job activity, job development, small business development in the St. Louis metropolitan area. A lot of it focused around federal programs and resources, but the federal programs and resources that support that inclusion are not mentioned. The VBRC is not mentioned. Veterans as entrepreneurs are not really mentioned other than in passing in the forward, not in the plan itself. So I would urge anybody who's there today or who sees this video to please engage with the St. Louis 2030 Jobs Plan employees and staff. Go talk to them. Make sure that we're at the table. If we're not at the table, embarrass them. Make it a point. It's time for us to be at the table and to no longer be excluded. The second example I'll give you is in the last 3 weeks, the Missouri Department of Economic Development and the Missouri Veterans Commission have launched another website, which is essentially a website that talks about veterans programs, policies, and resources available in Missouri. Once again, no mention of the VBRC, and the VBRC's been there for 15 years, and it's got a 5-state responsibility, but it's ignored by the state of Missouri. So no mention of VBRC. Passing mention of SBA itself, no mention of the district offices in Missouri, no mention of the Veterans Business Resource Councils, no mention of the federal contracting opportunities, no mention of the counseling and training that's available from the broad range of SBA resource partners, including and especially the VBRC. So you get the picture. Basically, you got these two initiatives happening in our home state of Missouri today. And in both instances, veterans as entrepreneurs are barely touched on and broadly ignored. And it's up to the community of veterans. And I'll do my part, but I'm in my 70s now, and I'm not going to be out there every day banging on doors, raising heck. What we need to do is we need to make sure that veterans are included. And you cannot just depend on Darcella and her limited staff to do this for every veteran entrepreneur that resides in her 5-state area. You've got to pick up the mantle. You've got to get involved. You've got to self-advocate. You've got to request resources. You've got to call the question of why there are programs that are ignored, like the state of Missouri price preference program for disabled veteran contracting with state entities. Well, have you ever seen a report from the state of Missouri Department of Economic Development that talks about the outcomes from that statute that's been in place for a number of years now? I've never seen one. I've never been able to find a single report, and I've never been able to find any information from the Missouri Veterans Commission or the Missouri Department of Economic Development, for that matter, who is responsible for that program. So please get involved. Don't just leave it to Darcella and her staff. They have plenty to do, and we need your advice. So in closing, I hope you get the picture. None of this happens by accident. If you don't, and if we don't step up and require inclusion, we will be tacitly excluded. That's my lesson that I'm trying to share going forward. Thank you, Darcella. Thank you, Mayor Jones. Again, congratulations to you. Excuse me. And thank you to Maureen at the SBA District Office. You've been a stalwart champ for small business in St. Louis for decades. I salute you and thank you.